He said it was just a follow-up appointment. But the glitter on his cuff told a different story. I tasted the lie before I heard it. A faint sweetness of someone else's perfume clung to my husband's collar, a sparkle of cosmetic glitter winking from the French cuff he rolled as if to air out the truth. He kissed my cheek, set his leather bag by the door, and asked about the shelter's newest rescue like he always did. I answered like I always did, and I filed away the detail like I had learned to do when something in our life sounded off by half a note. My name is Rachel. I run Sunfield Haven, a small but stubbornly hopeful animal shelter in a converted brick warehouse that smells like oatmeal shampoo and fresh cedar shavings. My husband, Ethan, is a board-certified plastic surgeon. He builds new beginnings for people with a scalpel and a steady hand. Reconstructions after cancer, scar revisions after accidents, and yes, plenty of augmentations for women who wanted the confidence they felt inside to match the mirror. For 10 years, we were the couple you could sketch on a wedding cake. His tuxedo bow, my simple dress, Labrador-shaped cake topper, because, of course, we worked. We worked at work, and we worked at marriage. He learned the names of my shelter regulars and the way our pit mix, maple, trembled during thunderstorms. I learned the choreography of his operating days, the pre-op coffee at 5:15, the way he hummed Vivaldi under his breath while tying his tie, the text at noon if a case was running long. In the small hours, we would lie in bed with the window cracked and the city's night noises drifting up like faraway radio. He'd ask how the shy tabby was eating. I'd ask if a patient's swelling had finally settled. For the longest time, it felt like a quiet, competent, love-to people building kindness into their corners of the world. The day everything began to tilt started out ordinary. It was a Tuesday in late fall, the kind that carries the smell of burning leaves and the first guilt of hot chocolate. I was at the shelter restocking cans in a pyramid that would topple the second an exuberant beagle sneezed nearby. Ethan texted a photo, blue scrubs, shoe covers, thumbs up outside, or 2. Routine augmentation, he wrote, home by 6. Save me a bowl of your chili. At 3, a delivery van brought us a new industrial dryer. At 4, a storm rolled over the river, banging down rain so hard the street looked like it was boiling. At 5, the power hiccuped and came back with half the lights out, leaving the kennels in a gray hush. I set battery candles in the hallway and sat on the concrete with an elderly shepherd who hated thunder. I felt a small, ordinary happiness at the thought of Ethan walking in, damp at the shoulders, sniffing the chili from the entryway. At 7:30, he still wasn't home. I called. Straight to voicemail. I texted. No reply. At 9, the rain stopped, and the city smelled rinsed. He walked in at 9:15 with glitter on his cuff and a sweetness on his collar I didn't wear. Follow-up ran long, he said, and his voice sounded like a song he didn't know all the words to. For a week, I did what women who love careful men do. I believed him while memorizing the facts, the glitter, the perfume, the way he smoothed his tie when he lied, a small grooming tic as old as med school. Then I set the thoughts aside like I set aside cracked ceramic bowls waiting for glue. You cannot run a shelter without patience. You cannot love a surgeon without it either. That Friday, I went to his office to bring him lunch, 2 turkey sandwiches, extra pickles, the way he liked. The waiting room smelled like eucalyptus and toner. The receptionist smiled, and her smile carried a nervous edge I had seen on interns asked to cover 2 shifts at once. He just scrubbed into a revision case, she said. You can leave it in his office if you like. I passed framed certificates and black and white photographs of post-reconstruction smiles. On the credenza in his office, among glossy journals and a bobblehead someone had given him as a joke, lay a patient chart slightly ajar under a pen. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. A name sat on the sticker tab in clear letters. Ava Kincaid. I knew that name, though not from his practice. She had more followers on social media than our city had people. A model if you believed the captions. A brand if you believed the ads. In photos, she looked like a mood board of the internet's desires. High cheekbones, lithe waist, the kind of effortless hair that takes 3 hours. I didn't take the chart. I took my hands and put them in my pockets because sometimes that is the only way to keep them from shaking. 2 weeks later, I found the missing corner of the puzzle without looking for it. One of Ethan's colleagues, Monroe, the anesthesiologist who had a soft spot for our shelter's senior dogs, stopped by with a donation of blankets. We were folding them on the lobby bench when he said casually, "Nice save on that Kincaid case." At first I thought we were going to lose the pocket. Tissue was angry, implant wanted to ride up. He worked the capsule like it was cello string. Ballerina level control. I nodded like I understood. I understood too much. Complications happen in the best hands. Implants are foreign guests in a human body, and sometimes the body insists on reminding them of that. Infections, rejection, pockets that refuse to hold shape. These are technical storms, and surgeons who are artists can sometimes steer a ship through when logic says it should sink. I never begrudged him the pride he took in outcomes that let women stand in front of a mirror and cry for the right reasons. It was the way Monroe said her name, like a headline he assumed I had read. That night I lay awake listening to Ethan breathe. The room smelled like rain again, though the sky was clear. I thought of Ava Kincaid on a table under lights that never blink. I thought of Ethan's hands making 100 micro-decisions, his mind in the place it goes when only the precise thing exists. It is a beautiful state. It is also intoxicating, and not just for the patient. The first time I asked, he told the truth and a lie at once. We were loading bags of kibble into the back of my car after a bulk run. It was cold enough to sting, and our breath hung like 2 small clouds that did not touch. "Is there anything going on with you and a patient?" I said, my voice mild, as if I were asking if he'd seen my blue scarf. "No," he said. And then, after a beat too long, "She had a rough go." We talked afterward. People cling when they're scared. I handled it. I nodded like I believed him. I wanted to. God, I wanted to fold myself back into the simple story, where my husband helped people and came home. 2 days later, I found the story we were actually in. A volunteer had brought a box of donated linens to the shelter, and, tucked among the pillowcases, a garment bag with the boutique's white tag looped to the zipper. I hung it by the office door, planning to call the donor. On my way out that night, I brushed against it and felt something small shift inside, something that didn't belong in a dress bag. I unzipped. A pair of satin slippers, barely worn, fell into my hand like a secret. In the toe of one was a receipt. The bond room, rooftop bar, 2 champagne flights, and a dessert that cost more than our water bill. The timestamp placed Ethan out with someone at 10 p.m. on the Tuesday he'd told me he was suturing late. The name on the credit card was his. I put the slippers back. I sipped the bag. I made a vet appointment for a terrier with a persistent cough. I recorded the intake numbers for 3 kittens someone had left in a shoebox behind the post office. I heated a can of soup and sat at the little round table by the office window and ate it while watching snow flurries flash orange in the streetlight like fireflies in reverse. And then I went home to ask my husband a question he had already answered. He sat at the kitchen island reading operative notes on his tablet, his face set to the blankness of someone arguing with himself. I set the garment bag on the stool beside him and placed the receipt on the counter like a calling card. "Do you want to try again?" I asked with the truth. For a minute, I watched him reach for a version of the story that could let him keep both things. I watched him consider me and what I could bear and what he dared admit. Then something in his face gave way, like a suture pulled too hard. "It started after her revision," he said. "She was scared. I stayed late to check the drains and she cried in recovery. I walked her to the car. I told myself it was aftercare. It felt like rescue. Then it felt like a life I hadn't known I missed until I was inside it." He looked at me then with something like apology and something like confession, and something that made me cold with a kind of clinical clarity. "And you never considered that you were not the only rescuer in this marriage," I said. "That maybe I had been rescuing the both of us for years in quieter rooms." He flinched. To his credit, he didn't ask what I meant. To his credit, he knew. We tried counseling. We tried boundaries and schedules and the kind of moral accounting you can do for months without realizing the numbers never add up because the problem is not math. In session, he said all the right things with the careful cadence of a man who knows how to talk in rooms where he is being measured. Outside session, his phone tilted just out of my sightline when it buzzed. The day I found the second set of keys, I realized I was done trying to keep a house that someone else had opened another door inside. The keys were on a ring with a copper tag stamped BR37. Bond room, floor 37, short-term residences for the rich or the pretending. I sat on our stairs with Maple's head in my lap and let the cold draft from under the front door move over my face until I could breathe steady. The next part of the story would have gutted me if I hadn't spent a lifetime building a spine. Ethan tried to take the house. He didn't call it that. He called it a fair distribution considering how much he had invested in our life and how the shelter was more a passion project than an income stream. He called it smart for both of us. His voice was reasonable in the way that men's voices can be when what they want is unreasonable. What he didn't account for was the thing he had told me to get before we married. The thing he had insisted would protect us both. The prenuptial agreement we had drafted in a quiet office on a spring afternoon when we still sat on the same side of a table. In it, we had agreed that the house, a small craftsman, I had inherited from my grandfather and then refinanced to add a sunroom that smells like jasmine in summer, would remain my separate property, no matter the weather. He had put the words there because he believed in planning. He could not now unwrite them because he believed in wanting. My attorney read the agreement and rubbed her thumb down the margin like it was silk. "It holds," she said simply. "He can ask. He can posture. But he cannot have what you did not promise." In a kinder world, that would have been the end of that. But people do not let go of houses or lovers or versions of themselves without trying to reframe the story for a while. The keys began to float a new narrative, that I had focused on stray dogs at the expense of our marriage, that my heart was a warehouse with too many cages, that what he did was wrong, but also inevitable in a home where the sink always had a bottle drying and the hallway always had a leash hanging, and perhaps he had been pushed out by the smell of wet fur and bleach. There is a special kind of loneliness in watching a person you loved describe your exact kindness as the reason they were unkind. Meanwhile, my world filled with small real emergencies that made his rehearsed ones look like the theater they were. A litter of blue-eyed mutts came in with parvo, and we ran an IV rig overnight in the break room that smelled like chicken broth and chlorine. A cat who had lived under a tool shed for 2 winters decided finally to trust a human hand and slept for 18 hours on a warm towel like it was the first proper sleep of his life. A high school girl came to volunteer and sat in the hallway crying because a senior terrier put her paw on the girl's knee and the girl's heart had never been touched so gently. I tell you these details because I am not the kind of woman who burned down a life without checking who else lived inside it. When I told Ethan he had to move out, I had already arranged for him to take Maple's favorite blanket because she loved him too, and would be splitting time, at least for a while. I had already made a list of my accounts and rotated the passwords and set the house alarm code to the date my grandfather signed the deed because it pleased me to be held by the past in that small way. I had already scheduled a meeting with the bank to ensure the shelter's savings were insulated against any storm a soon-to-be ex might blow our way. It took 3 hearings and a great deal of his lawyer's words to arrive exactly where our prenup said we would. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled into a braid that looked like it could lift a car, read the agreement and then looked over her glasses at Ethan, the way a teacher looks at a child who has come to class without doing the reading. "The house remains separate property," she said. "The account you call discretionary is the 501c3 fund for the animal shelter, which you do not touch. Temporary spousal support is denied given the disparity in future earnings in your favor." "Counsel, do you have any other questions for Ms. Hart?" "No," his lawyer said. "Not that would change the math." Ethan stared at the table. He had made miracles in the OR for women who needed their bodies to feel like themselves again. He could not make this one. And in that moment, I felt a complicated tenderness for the man who had once learned the names of all our fosters and who had remembered to pick up a particular brand of canned pumpkin because the shelter's choosiest beagle would only eat that kind mixed with her kibble. People are not one thing. They are 100. And sometimes the thing that wins is not the thing you fell in love with. As for Ava, because I know you are wondering whether stories like hers end with red carpets or hospital corridors, the complication Ethan solved turned out to be the easiest part of her life to fix. A few months after the hearings, a woman from a small-town newspaper called the shelter, asking if I knew how to reach Dr. Hart. She was working on a piece about a local girl who had come home after the city ate her whole. The girl was setting up a fundraiser to pay for reconstructive surgery after a second infection took her implants out. She wanted to use her story to help other women understand that bodies are not products and that fear can look like glamour if you angle it right in photos. I wrote down the number and slid it across the desk to our receptionist to pass along if Ethan called. I sat for a while with my hands flat on the paperwork in front of me, feeling the beat of my pulse in my palms. It is possible to feel both sorrow and relief at once, like 2 notes that make a chord you did not expect to love. The last chapter, if you want to call it that, did not snap shut. It softened, slowly, the way daylight fades from a shelter's windows in winter. Ethan moved into a condo near the hospital. He kept his appointment with Maple every Tuesday at 6, showing up with a bag of carrots because she had turned into the kind of dog who politely asked for vegetables. He sent a donation at the end of the year in the shelter's honor, unsigned but obvious, and I wrote a thank you note that said exactly what I meant. For the good parts, thank you. As for me, I painted the sunroom the color of chalk lemons and planted jasmine along the fence. I took in a senior cat with one ear and named him Captain. I learned to sleep diagonally on a queen-sized bed, an extravagance I recommend to anyone who has ever slept curled around someone else's storm. On the first warm day of spring, the volunteers and I dragged the agility equipment onto the patchy lawn and let every dog run until tongues lolled and the world felt simpler than it is. People sometimes ask me if I miss being married to a brilliant man. I tell them the truth. I still am, in the way that our bodies remember how good things were, and in the way that kindness we gave once will always belong to us. But the house is quiet now in the gentlest way. It smells like cinnamon toast and wet noses and cedar. When thunder cracks over the river, Maple presses against my leg, and I say to her what I learned to say to myself. It is only noise. The house is strong. The storm passes. And the woman who runs the shelter, she learned finally that rescue is not just a job. It is also a boundary. It is knowing when to open the door and when to change the locks. If you aim for a dramatic ending, I can only give you a true one. The glitter on his cuff washed out in the next laundry. The perfume faded. The house stayed. The dog slept. Somewhere, a surgeon saved a life under bright lights, and somewhere, a woman decided she would rather be ordinary and safe than spectacular and scared. If there is a moral here, it fits in the pocket of any coat and rattles when you walk. Preparation is not paranoia. Love does not excuse betrayal. And a promise written on paper is still a promise, even when someone wishes it were not. So when people ask me how it ended, I tell them it didn't. It continued, just on a different street, with a marigold front door, with a shelter that opens at 10 and closes when the last bowl is washed, with a woman who likes the way quiet sounds in a room she kept, with a Tuesday night where the only follow-up is a dog learning, finally, to come when called. The keys